So we're going to talk about a case study of a real-world migration to the public cloud. This was a customer we'll talk about in the next slide but they migrated over to Amazon Web Services from a proprietary on-premises system. So we're not talking about vaporware or Kool-Aid today. We're going to talk about something that really happened, a real success story. My name is John Friesen. My company, Monocle Systems, we are a hosting company that specializes in deploying customers in the public cloud. Here we are, we're a talented group of basis administrators. We're the soldiers who install systems and we keep them running, we keep the performance good. Why do we like the public cloud? Because our job has historically been made very difficult by the constraints of traditional infrastructure. Public cloud erases all of the constraints that we've experienced in the past, especially capacity management, which goes out the window. Amazon Web Services, for example, as a public cloud, they laugh at your terabytes. They do not care about your petabytes. They think in terms of exabytes and zettabytes. You cannot use up the capacity in Amazon Web Services. Instead of capacity management, you're doing cost management. So your goal is to get the best out of the platform without paying through the nose. And as a service provider, for us, it's about profit management. We want to make sure that we're delivering a great service and not spending too much on the cloud. But the capacity management issues of the past go out the window completely. That's very powerful for us. In our case study, I'll show you why that was a big advantage for us in this deployment. The other thing that the cloud does for us is a tremendous simplification. Anyone here ever been to a data center? You ever gone on a data center tour? A couple people. You go into a data center, the air vibrates with the energy of 100 chilling air conditioners. You see snakes of cables everywhere, carefully color-coded. You see racks and racks of servers with their blinking lights. All of that stuff is abstracted away when you go to the public cloud. That's what it's virtualizing. 15 years ago, we were all talking about virtualizing servers with VMware, for example. Now you're virtualizing the whole data center. And what's in a data center? Compute, storage, network. So those things are all handled now by the click of a button in the public cloud. That's very powerful for a system administration team or a service provider like us because it enables us to deliver very agilely. Think about all the skill sets that go in from the infrastructure up. So from managing the kilowatts per square foot and the air conditioning capacity all the way up through the operating system and into the basis layers. Think about all the skill sets involved. You've seen over the past 20 years, IT organizations get into little silos. One guy does the network, one guy does the SAN, one guy does the operating system. And now with the simplification of the public cloud, we can collapse those layers. So a group of talented basis administrators can handle a lot of this stuff. That's why we use SUSE as our preferred Linux, because SUSE is the simplest Linux to manage. It has a really terrific user interface. And it has hot patching, so you can patch your systems without downtime. So our goal as a service provider is to simplify the stack as much as possible. It enables us to deliver value very quickly to our customers. So I'll tell you about Superior Group, a company that does staffing, tremendous high transactional volume in terms of timesheets, in terms of invoices. They do pass-through of invoices at a very high volume. So you can imagine what a system of theirs might look like. In fact, we don't have to imagine. I've got it drawn up here. ERP, classic ERP with a PI layer that is very central to a spider web of interfaces to banks and to suppliers and to third-party tools, as well as internal tools that they have, for example, an internal timekeeping system. So a spider web of interfaces. When you're migrating a system, even to a traditional data center, but especially to the cloud, the migration is pretty easy. It's the interfaces which are hard, because you have to make sure that every interface has been accounted for. So if you have EDI or Seaburger or web services or anything like that, that everything works on day one after the migration. So I'll show you a timeline or an overview of what the migration looks like, but a lot of it is spent caring and feeding for the interfaces and making sure they're ready for day one and with high security. Now, security is on everyone's mind. As a cloud provider, security is number one because the baddies are out there trying to get into your systems. Amazon, as a platform, is tremendous for delivering high security systems because they have a very granular firewall system And you can build the same kind of traditional segregation of systems that you can on premises. So if you talk to a stodgy old network guy and they want to draw the DMZ on the board and the different subnets, you can do all that stuff in Amazon. This customer was looking to migrate to the cloud because they had a few different challenges. One was the proprietary platform. They were mostly a Windows shop, and then they had some oddball IBM systems, the AIX systems, which are the only ones of their kind. So they had the kind of an oddball system that was not fitting well into their infrastructure from a support perspective. Their disaster recovery was brittle and not quite where they wanted it to be. They wanted fast, reliable disaster recovery for all their systems. Capacity was a big one, and we've all been there, where you can't fit another disk into the disk array. There's no more sockets on the motherboard to add CPU. And so fighting against capacity is a real constraint for a typical customer, and the cloud erases capacity limitations. And finally, they wanted to be poised for the next move for SAP, which was to bring in a gateway, business objects, and increase their use of BobJ for data transformation. So the migration looked like a classic migration project, but compressed. In a typical migration project, what's the first thing that happens? Procurement of hardware. And then you start waiting. For us, we push a button and the hardware is procured when you use public cloud. So we like to say that we can get a customer to the login screen of their development system within a week of contract signing. And that's because we can build up all of the infrastructure of a customer within 5 minutes. Firewalls, storage, servers, all pre-configured. And so we can start installing the SAP systems, which is the actual value we're bringing. We can start running SAP inst within 5 minutes of contract signing. And that can get us to the endpoint of getting the system in front of the customers very quickly. So all of the procurement phase was erased, and we can get right to the fun part, exporting a system. This was a heterogeneous migration, AIX to Linux, so heterogeneous migration, export, transmit the data over the wire, and import. Anyone here planning on doing a migration, the size of that pipe for your data is critical. This customer had 1 terabyte of data and a very specific downtime window that they had to move it in. So the size of the pipe was critical. We built up an MPLS connection, the same kind of telco connection you do for a traditional data center, and push that wire, the data over the wire in time. Then validation. Like I said, we have a spider web of interfaces. We had to make sure all those interfaces worked. Anything involving file system level had to work. So a great deal of testing, performance validation, and finally cutover weekend, which is when all the real fun happens. A typical architecture might look like this. This is an Amazon architecture, but something similar might be built in Azure, for example. You put production in a data center, QA and dev in another data center. That's your high availability infrastructure. In Amazon, they have something called S3 for long-term storage of data. It takes the place of your tape drives because you have to store your backup somewhere. You probably have a tape jukebox, and then a truck takes your tape far away from your data center. But in Amazon, you can beam that stuff into a tool they call S3, and then you can store it for archival storage in something called Glacier. Glacier stores data at 1 cent per gigabyte, which is practically free. So for us as a service provider, it's amazing because we can store customer backups for, let's say, a 6-month retention window. This is actually a genuinely useful thing because customers sometimes they'll say, you know what, I want to look at what my system looked like before the last quarter end close. So then you better hope that you have your backups for long enough. And this is a real thing that happened. So during this migration project, we dealt with primarily timing, of course. The timing constraints on a migration are critical. This customer had 13 weeks to get migrated due to the support contracts on their old IBM software. So we had a hard deadline. So 13 weeks. So you have the overall timeline, and then you have cutover weekend. What is that going to look like? How long can your systems be down, if at all? So that's critical when you're doing a migration project. And then the other stuff too. We had to make sure the systems were sized right. We had to make sure that we were licensed for SAP on Linux. We had to deal with the MPLS connection. So these are all classic migration topics. We had big success out of it. Not only did we succeed on time, but we solved their disaster recovery issues. We're in the public cloud now, so we have unlimited capacity in many different locations. So the DR plan is very, very easy for us to architect. Unlimited capacity, so if they need an extra system. I mentioned They wanted to restore the systems, get a copy restored back from 3 months ago. And so we push a button, we get a server, do the restore, then they have their copy of the system from 3 months ago, then we push another button and it's gone and they stop paying for it. The public cloud is very, very flexible for that kind of thing. So we solved their capacity issues, built a very high security environment with what's called a bastion layer, so the bad guys on the internet can't get to their back-end systems because there's a strong insulating layer, double firewall. And finally, their performance doubled. And it wasn't like we went to HANA. This wasn't huge amounts of hardware we threw at it, but the performance has been very, very positive. So we at Monocle, we are an SAP, run SAP partner. We specialize in hosting and managing SAP systems. We are one of the very few companies that is a SAP services partner and an Amazon partner. And we're a SUSE partner. So we specialize in SAP Solution Manager, NetWeaver, HANA, and hosting.